Welcome to Ageless by Rescu. This podcast is devoted to exploring the science of rejuvenation, uncovering the most trusted experts, the must-have products, innovations, and technology in the field of vitality, aesthetics, new beauty, and cosmetic enhancement. Dr. Naveen, I'm so delighted to have you on the show. This has been a long time in the making for us, huh?
That's right, Baha. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Yeah.
I always love listening to you. I think, for those of you who don't know, not only are you an esteemed plastic surgeon in Australia, but you were also the former president of the Australian Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons. And now you are the scientific convener of the Non Surgical Symposium. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So tell me, what does the scientific convener, I know it's pretty much, you run the whole thing, but specifically, what is this role and why did you decide to put together a consulting committee for this year's non-surgical symposium?
That's a very good question, because we have been running the Non-Surgical Symposium as a not-for-profit meeting focused primarily on evidence-based scientific research in the non-surgical space for the last many years. And I have been convening this meeting for the last 4 years now. And all of us are very good at what we do, but over time we tend to know less and less of the stuff that we do. So I thought to have a perspective of having different viewpoints, different perspectives across the industry, which is predominantly the participants in the industry include all healthcare professionals, starting from plastic surgeons, other surgeons, specialist dermatologists, doctors who do cosmetic injecting, nurse practitioners, enrolled nurses, registered nurses, and dermal therapists. We said, why don't we get the viewpoint from each one of them? So we have one person representing each sector on the advisory committee, who can then advise me on things that are important as how they see the industry in, which ultimately makes for a better learning experience for everyone who comes to the event. So we're very proud of the fact that this is the first time we had a scientific advisory committee, and we have put together a very, very good program. And unlike the last few years where the focus was on being a better injector and trying to do the best for your patient, this year we have all of that. Plus, we've got systems in place to put all that collective knowledge together, so that if you can go to your clinic on Monday morning and you want to put into practice these things, there is a structured framework, because systems make sure that you do not miss anything. Systems make sure that you use what we call as the good practice, a best practice in the industry based on evidence-based and current science.
I'm so impressed by that. I'm impressed by that for two reasons, and I'll tell you why. As a consumer, as the end consumer of these services, it is so reassuring to know that a body such as this and someone with your esteemed credentials has acknowledged that it is in the coming together of multiple experts and multiple areas of expertise that the patient is going to get the best care and the clinician is going to deliver the most cutting edge, scientifically validated, evidence-based treatment protocol to the patient. And to me, that's very reassuring, because it sounds like everyone has put their ego aside, and instead of operating in silos where, the surgeon thinks they know it best, the aesthetic doctor thinks they know it best, the regenerative medicine expert thinks they know it best. You've collected everyone together in a scientific advisory board, and you will be sharing resources. And as you said, so importantly, systems that will allow the protocols to be delivered in a safe, structured, measurable, efficient manner to the end consumer. So for that, on behalf of all of us, all the consumers that are going to be the recipient of these benefits, I thank you. I really want to have a conversation with you, because something very exciting and very different is about to happen on July 1, and it's going to affect the aesthetic and the surgical industry very much, and consumers are going to be the beneficiaries of these changes. I would love for you to share in layman's terms what's happening on July 1 and why it's important.
Thank you. But I think July 1 is not very far away. And AHPRA, which is the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority, have come up with guidelines that define how a regulated health service like cosmetic surgery or cosmetic procedures should be performed in the context of a clinical setting. So there's a whole heap of rules that govern cosmetic surgery, starting from the care given to the patient by the practitioner, and also very stringent do's and don'ts about advertising. The same things apply to cosmetic procedures that are non-surgical procedures, but of a lesser intensity, but nevertheless still there. Now, this is all designed to make the industry be better regulated so that the consumer can make a choice with confidence that the person is going to give the consumer the best possible outcome. And these are, again, talking back into systems and safeguards. These are regulatory safeguards built around the delivery of cosmetic surgical care and cosmetic procedural care to patients, where you cannot mislead based on advertising, because we all know that advertising plays a big role in anything that we buy and sell nowadays, and cosmetic surgery and cosmetic
we're,
procedures.
as media, we're heavily regulated too. I mean, there are so many things that we can and can't say, and we can and can't endorse, and we have to be, thank God, completely transparent now when we've been on the receiving end of a gift or a free treatment, or we've been paid to be a spokesperson for a treatment, a procedure, a product. And I think that has been a massive benefit to the end reader, the consumer, the listener. But this is going one step further, because it's now placing that same responsibility on the practitioners.
That's correct. So what's happening is there are guidelines at every aspect of the patient journey, starting from how they interact with your advertising, how they, what can you say, what can't you say, what words you can use. And it's all about trying to remain as scientific as possible and as evidence-based as possible. To give an example, colloquial terms cannot be used in isolation. They have to be used as medical terms. For example, you can no longer say the word tummy tuck, if I can use that term. You have to combine that with the word abdominoplasty, which is the medical term for the procedure, basically trying to showcase that this is serious surgery.
I'm so pleased you said this, because I had an abdominoplasty a year and a half ago, and I have never in my life referred to it as a tummy tuck.
Yeah.
And my goodness, it is a serious procedure, and the recovery is something I have never experienced before. The procedure itself is a serious medical, scientific procedure. It was performed by a qualified plastic surgeon. It was big, it was heavy duty, and I'm so pleased that it's not being called a tummy tuck, because that is the last thing that it is.
That's right. And you probably heard about the marketing terms such as lunchtime lipo and lunchtime facelift.
Yes.
In some ways, to trivialize the impact of the recovery, so that you can come and go back to work after lunch. There's nothing like it. And everyone who's gone through a surgical procedure, just as you referenced your experience, will tell it is not as what it's made out in the media. So I think all of us as responsible practitioners have an obligation to keep it real, so to speak. And yes, these are important considerations for the patient, because if the patient feels that this is beyond what they can cope with, downtime, organizing time off work, so on and so forth, then they can make the choice not to have the procedure, as opposed to thinking this is just an overnight stay, day surgery case, very trivialize the whole experience, and suddenly post-surgery you're hit with an experience that you never bargained for. So I think these are all things that will tighten up the advertising regulation of the industry to make patients' decision-making a bit more grounded, so to speak, and better. The other thing is you have to now have for cosmetic surgery a referral from a GP doctor, otherwise you cannot have it. And you also need to have a mandatory testing for what is called a psychological vulnerability, because a lot of patients, it is proposed that there's a significant percentage of body dysmorphic disorders in the community, and these patients are vulnerable. And as a consequence, we need to see if they need other forms of help, not just a surgical intervention. And in the cosmetic non-surgical space as well, that those regulations are coming in.
Dr. Naveen, this is the part that has had a lot of conversation, the psychological assessment. So firstly, I am super happy on behalf of consumers everywhere that AHPRA are imposing these regulations when it comes to the consultation period, as you said, keeping it real so that the patient has the opportunity to make an informed decision. Certainly, I'm grateful that this happened to me, because when I was having assessment for my surgery, my surgeon made it very clear that recovery was going to be more than a couple of days off. So I made arrangements. I had someone pick me up from hospital. I had someone stay with me for the first 2 weeks coming out of hospital, because I couldn't even lie down to sleep, much less get up
Yeah,
and walk around or take care
absolutely.
of my child or look after our pet. So because my surgeon had been so transparent with me, I had the opportunity to prepare, and therefore I didn't have the pitfalls of rupturing the work that he'd done, or plunging into a dark depression from the pain, from the lack of mobility. It was really, really his care. And I had, I think, 6 follow-up consults after the surgery, which again was a lot, but absolutely necessary.
That's
Each
right.
consult was necessary. But I didn't have the psychological assessment. And I know that this is a new conversation piece. There's been a huge amount of chatter of, do we need psychological assessment for the non-surgical procedures? But let's talk first about the surgical procedures, because you are a plastic surgeon. And I would like to know how this might work as part of a consultation, and or rather how you will be offering it in your practice.
Look, I think that I do offer it in the practice currently. So I have been doing that for the last 5.5 years, and the current guidelines specify that you have to administer the psychological testing at the consultation, and based on that, whether it goes for additional screening or no additional screening will be determined by the test. Now, I think how we're going to do that is to inform the patient that as of 1st of July, you're going to have a mandatory testing to look for anything that is hidden, covert, that you're not obviously figured out. And if the test turns out to be positive, indicating that you need to have additional treatment or non-surgical assessment and so on and so forth, then that will be clearly conveyed to the patient before they take the test, because that's kind of very, very important, in my opinion, to tell the patient the implications of turning positive or turning negative, right? And they come with an expectation, I'm going to have a surgical procedure, and then suddenly you're telling them to go and have a mental health assessment. That's not a very aligned discussion. So it's something that they'll be told. Like, the mandatory requirements as of 1st of July are a GP referral to see a surgeon for cosmetic surgery, and a in-house psychological testing. If the result turned out to be positive and you're seen as someone who may not be suitable, you need to have additional testing and counseling by a qualified psychologist to see how best we can optimize your care for you.
There seems to be one of the things that's the pushback on this new mandatory rule, is that the psychotherapy fraternity is stretched and under-resourced post-pandemic already for other psychological treatment
Yeah.
plans. And so adding this to the mix is going to clog up the system for something that many people are saying, well, this is a vanity issue. The other one might be a life-threatening issue. How do you think there's going to be this balance of finding enough psychologists who are able to administer the care that you were talking about if the patient is deemed to be in a higher risk category?
Yeah.
And how do you propose that the surgeons and the medical fraternity who are administering these procedures, whether they're surgical or non-surgical, are going to be held accountable to make sure that this process is followed if it does mean that, potentially a lucrative procedure has to be put on the backbench?
Look, I think it's there's two aspects to this one. So I don't think the whole impact of this regulation has been quote unquote modeled to see who are the providers, city-based, state-based, and who is trained, who is qualified. So I think it is that hasn't been modeled on appropriate lines. But having said that, the Psychological Society, I'm sure, will now suddenly see that there is a demand for services, and they will, I'm sure, put together a panel of people who can help out patients in each state. Now, how will this impact the non-surgical industry is, the surgical industry, you have no choice. You have to administer the test. It becomes a part of your medical records. It has to be documented, and then you take it from there. And there are a couple of tests in the available for us, and there is one called the patient assessment test that was many years in the making by the Australasian Foundation for Plastic Surgery in collaboration with a professor of body image from the UK, and that test is now readily available, and
Is
plastic
that the
surgeons
gold standard for testing at the moment?
we don't know which is the gold standard because no one has told us what is the gold standard. But there are, from what I know of, there are four testing methodologies available currently, but in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll know if any more are coming on the market. So this one is called the patient assessment tool, and you can go through a small training program to familiarize yourself with how to test and then how to interpret those results and take it from there. But I think come 1st of July, there'll be a few teething issues, I can assure you that.
Yes, I'm going to ask you a question which relates to this. And again, from your experience and perspective, I'd love to know. A growing number of patients in the surgical space are teens, older teens. So, and I believe it's legal after 16, correct, to have rhinoplasty, breast augmentation, liposuction. There's a whole lot of things you can have if you have parental consent. Is that correct?
That's how I understand, but I think the stricter regulations for teenagers having cosmetic surgery in terms of assessing their psychological vulnerability. You need to have a GP to vet that. There's significantly longer waiting periods in, or sort of quote unquote cooling off periods. And there's a whole heap of safeguards built into the system. So one of the common things that patients seek is a procedure called breast reduction, which can impact their lifestyle, and the quality of life at a very young age. So these are operations that can be seen as cosmetic, but at the same time, they impact adolescents or teenagers. So it's in this case where a GP can help the patient access the appropriate practitioner, the treatment, and then as long as there are guidelines in place to make sure that delivery of care is not just you decide I want to have a procedure, and then you're going to have it done. But for other things, for example, like rhinoplasty, if there's a medical indication that could well fall into the pathway. But things such as liposuction in teenage adults is a medical reason for it. I think it's going to be harder because it'll be seen as a pure cosmetic procedure, and I'm sure that there's going to be more stricter guidelines because you'll have to get the clearance from a psychologist/psychiatrist as well as a GP to support you in the journey.
And I find that, I guess that's reassuring. And in total transparency, I had my first cosmetic surgery when I was 17. I was 17 years old. I wanted rhinoplasty. I booked in. I didn't need a GP referral. I
Yeah.
went to a plastic surgeon in Canberra at John James Hospital when I was 17 years old, and I had my first rhinoplasty. It was not for a medical reason. My second rhinoplasty was for a medical reason because I had my first one too
Yeah.
early, and my skull hadn't grown, and I needed to have my septum straightened out when I was 25. But so I guess I'm reflecting on personal experience, and also as a mother of a 12-year-old who may not be getting marketed to by advertising
Yeah.
to be interested in cosmetic surgery, but she's certainly getting marketed to, because when you see, pop stars and actors and actresses who have undergone almost like a complete
Makeover.
makeover, for lack
Yeah.
of a better word, exactly. When you see some of the most famous, well-paid models in the world who literally were not born this way and achieved their look through surgery, it's hard as a mother to then say, look, oh, you can't do that. Don't do it. It's terrible for you. So as a mother, I'm excited that the medical fraternity are going to close ranks, and they're going to say, the GP is going to say, no, I'm not going to give that referral. The surgeon is going to say, let's have a look at the psychological framework before I proceed with this procedure, and potentially won't proceed with the procedure.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think social media, as we all know, is a part of our life, and I think with regards to body enhancements, cosmetic surgery, cosmetic non-surgical procedures, it's quite rampant, and little by little, and if we can use the word creep, the advertising influence just creeps on you. So what was normal a year ago has been incrementally increased. So the new normal is slightly different. Yes, it is aspirational because that's how it's been marketed to you. And all of a sudden, what you thought normal at the age of 11 is not normal at the age of 13, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, the ground realities are shifting very, very fast. And people, if you follow Instagram, you'll know that people post their own experiences or photographs of having had surgery before and after, which is very knowledgeable. But at the same time, how does a 12-year-old interpret that one? How does a 15-year-old interpret
Absolutely.
that one?
Or how does a 12-year-old interpret, you know, one day Ariana Grande looked like this and the next day she looked like that, or Bella Hadid was born looking like this and now she's
Yeah.
the most highest paid model because of the surgery that
Yeah.
she had. When I was younger, the most exciting transformation was the width of your eyebrows. So the fashion of eyebrows would change. You'd have super thin eyebrows or thick, beautiful eyebrows. And then you'd pay the price for it for the next 30 years because you overplucked your eyebrows.
That's right.
That you can live with. But now Lily is living in a world where, thank God she doesn't want this, but maybe she's dreaming of a Brazilian butt lift. That's different to having your eyebrows overplucked. That really is something that is going to impact her health, her mental health, her well-being for the rest of her life. So you're right. The social media impact is so fast. The creep has happened gradually, and it's constantly changing, but
That's
it's
right.
no longer, if you're blonde or brunette, a bob or a shag, thick eyebrows or thin eyebrows. It's like boobs or flat chested, straight nose or natural nose, lips, no lips, bum, no bum. It's a lot. It's a lot to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone tends to have have a feature that is present in a celebrity. So somebody will have an eyebrow of person X, and someone will wish to have a cheek like person Y. So now they know that all those things are physically possible. You know what I mean? So it's like, so you can see how this whole thing.
It's like a shopping list. It's like, can I have, so-and-so's nose? Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's possible. It is actually possible.
absolutely.
Dr. Naveen, I would like to pivot the conversation slightly, and we'll come back to the new rules later, but I'm excited to talk to you, similar to the advisory board that you've put together, the scientific advisory panel you've put together for the Non Surgical Symposium, which I'm so delighted that I am attending this year. And I can't wait to be part of it and to share everything that I learn as a result of it with my audience. But you're doing something similar in your practice in terms of offering the full gamut of regenerative care and medicine and services. And this is something that you believe is going to be the new normal over the next 10 to 15 years.
Absolutely. So I think if you look at, let's take, for example, the Scientific Advisory Committee as a benchmark, and the multiple disciplines and professions involved in non-surgical aesthetics. So every single one is a committed professional who wants nothing but the best for the patient. But all of us are working in our own little silos, and our knowledge base is very focused on what we know and what we know well and do well. Right, but there is
and in a way that's good, because I
right.
want to know that Dr. Naveen Somia is going to every single surgical conference, symposium. He knows surgery inside out. That makes me happy that you make time to keep learning, growing, being better at that craft.
But there is so much of knowledge out here. That's an explosion of new things coming in all these disciplines, that it is almost impossible for one person to be on top of it. So that is why coming to a meeting like the non-surgical will just open up your eyes to say, okay, fine, you can do this and you can do that and you can do that. So this year in particular, we have a panel on what we call as care of the skin, because your cutaneous aging is an essential part of aging, especially if you live in sun-drenched country like Australia. Your skin aging is an essential part of aging. So we have a system in place that we're going to showcase at the NSS, how to take a patient through a skin consultation in terms of adding value to your patient care. So if I practice surgery, skin care or looking after the skin of the patient either before or after surgery is an essential part of the overall experience that the patient has, which does make a positive impact on the result, and also helps to maintain the result both in the short, medium, and the long term in a manner that previously was not possible, because
Absolutely.
Now you have cutting-edge scientific evidence to suggest that this is possible, this is doable, this is what you need to do.
That
So I think,
skincare can do it. That skincare is that efficacious. And I always say this, I say cosmeceutical skincare is really your first line of defense.
Yep. And it's DIY. You can do it at home as long as you get the right advice and the right products, and you mix and match and keep changing your strategy every 5 years, because your needs are different. And the same thing. So what we're trying to say is a collaborative approach to patient care is essential in this aesthetic industry. So if I can perform surgery, I'm not very good at looking after your skin. I can advise you on basic key points, but then there are professionals who are dedicated to looking after your skin. And that's kind of where you need to have a dedicated professional look after you, because that's when you get the best of everything. And similarly, if you have somebody who's a specialist dermatologist look after you, and there are certain things that the specialist dermatologist can look after you better than what I can look after you. And so there's a big avenue and a growing trend to collaborative care to improve the outcomes for your patient. And I think that's kind of what will be showcased at the NSS, that working together is an essential part of how you not only stay relevant, but you continue to provide the best for your patient. Otherwise, your offerings can become stale very quickly.
Well, I also like it from a consumer benefit point of view, in that, if I come to your clinic, I'm being treated as a whole and not as I'll just polish up this, but we'll ignore this cause area.
Yep.
And for me, one of the key things in my kind of regenerative journey was the hormonal piece and the integrative and regenerative medicine conversation. So my aesthetics physician, Dr. Joseph Hakeek, he said to me, before I keep buffing and puffing and filling and lasering, which we've been doing, you are now at a stage where you need hormonal intervention, and I don't do that. So I'm going to refer you to a doctor who is actually going to attend to that, because the sagging that you're now experiencing
Yeah.
is no longer just normal age. It's led by hormonal changes. And my work will only be a patch job if we don't attend to the root cause. So off I went to see Dr. Nasser for my hormonal needs. And that was revolutionary for me. It was just a great aha moment. And then similarly for device-based or threads, that wasn't his specialty. So he referred me to another doctor within his practice who administered the energy devices or the threads, which I've
Yeah.
had with Dr. Adina within his practice. So I do love that. I do love that I was cared for so much that I was moved around, and it was through that network that I got the referral for my surgeon who performed the abdominoplasty, and my surgeon knew the other doctors that were in my networks, and so I felt safe. But I thought to myself at the time, wouldn't it be great if everyone was together? I
Yeah.
didn't have to go to 5 different clinics to do this.
So you're right. I think expertise sometimes is it's hard to maintain that level of expertise in one place for obvious reasons. But I think shared care is probably in a way a very good model of care, and we're beginning to see this coming through fast and furious, as we say. And I think the future is also going to be very groundbreaking as we see more technology, more research coming into what we call as cellular aging and metabolic health. So you spoke about hormonal health. Hormonal health is one way of influencing your overall metabolic health, but people talk about lifestyle medicine and how lifestyle impacts your overall health. And that's a broad discipline called metabolic health. And there's plenty of evidence to say that how you look after your metabolic health, starting from your gut health and your overall sleep health and your mental health. So everything impacts one another. And I happened to read an article recently that suggested that your muscle is not just a structural organ for strength and mobility. It is an endocrine organ, and every time you
Your
activate your
muscle is an
muscle,
endocrine organ. Wow. I've
correct.
never
And
heard that.
that's right. It's a new paper that I read published last year, and it said that every time you activate your muscle, you produce a whole heap of beneficial hormones and growth factors that are very essential, that tick off A, B, C, and D. Right? And similar way, your sleep also impacts the way your gut health impacts the next day morning. So it's very all of these, as we have said before, have developed in independent silos, but I think in the
Yes.
next 5 to 10 years time, there will be a merging of all these, and all of a sudden you're now going to see somebody who's going to be practicing quote unquote integrative medicine, where you may go in to see somebody for let's say a cosmetic concern, and the person might say, look, have you thought about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and taking you back to a cellular level of aging. And mitochondrial aging is a big thing now, and people are understanding how mitochondria ages influences your entire aging, how your gut health influences your skin. So these are all things that are just around the corner and just waiting to be integrated. So I think there's plenty of research. It's only a matter of time before they become the new norm.
Definitely. And I often talk about, functional testing being the cornerstone of uh, your being ageless, is unless you know your internal dashboard,
Right.
whatever you do, if you don't know where you started and measure how you're going, you're just throwing money at it, or you're just throwing treatments at it, but you're not fine tuning it to be that personalized treatment model. And exactly as you said, part of functional medicine is understanding your gut health and your gut microbiome, understanding your metabolic health, understanding your mind health, and beyond, mindfulness, your neuro wellness, your
Yep.
agility, your memory, and the prevention of dementia and other
Yep.
age-related diseases is going to be part of the overall conversation you might actually have with your plastic surgeon. So
Yep.
it's one thing to go and have a facelift, but you also want to make sure that everything else works with it, that your heart health is good, that your mental cognition is good. So, the front matches the internals.
Absolutely, because I think if you look at a lot of cosmetic surgery and cosmetic intervention for patients who come to us and to cosmetic procedural for non-surgical interventions, these are patients who are well, who want to remain well, and they're prepared to commit and prepared to invest in that journey. So I think it's only a matter of time before that group of people start exploring other options as to what is new. Because now, as you said, the good thing about social media is that you don't have to go looking for answers, because answers get fed to you based on something that you liked on the algorithm that keeps changing. So if you have clicked on a metabolic health post of somebody else, next thing you know is you'll be fed a lot of metabolic health issues. If you've clicked on a gut health post, you get fed gut health. I follow an academic website about scientific papers. So all you have, because I follow certain key areas of cosmetic surgery, now that algorithm feeds me papers. Oh, you read this, so you may be interested in this one. So I don't no longer have to go looking for papers to read, because it get fed to me based on my interests, which then cements my authority in that field, because instead of reading one paper a month, I read about 4 papers a month. So that's how it's going to work. And I think everyone will become knowledgeable and understand this much better than what we know in 2023.
So going back to the new rules that are coming into place in July 1, what are some of the advertising changes that will happen with, I mean, because at the moment there are some quite heavy restrictions about advertising surrounding aesthetic work and surgery, but what will doctors be able to say? What will we see as consumers?
Look, I think the first thing is you're no longer meant to use testimonials of any kind. And that's always been the rule, but I think it's going to be enforced. And the definition of what is the testimonial is now stretched beyond what is the traditional testimonial going to be. So you're not allowed to interact with social media posts anymore. You can't comment, you can't thank, you can't like. You can't, if a patient gives you a thank you card, you can't take a photograph and post it on your social media account. So it's
Wow.
getting it is very, very stringent. And if you put a before and after photograph, they have to be very clinical, they have to be identical, and obviously you can't breach patient privacy. That's one thing. And you cannot have single photos. You can't have stock photos of lifestyle. You can't have person lying on a beach. You can't have person lying on a sunbed. You can't have patient riding a horse. Those are all seen as subconscious enablers of an unrealistic expectation.
Wow. So all of those perfectly airbrushed photos of a 16-year-old woman that's passing off as, a 45-year-old woman, no more.
No more.
So that flows to the aesthetics and the surgical industry. Is this for both sides, or are you talking just about surgical at the moment?
It's definitely for surgical, but the non-surgical space is a regulated industry. It's a regulated health service, right? So there's a bit of gray area there. So the clarity is not that evident at this stage, but in the next 2 to 3 weeks time, it will become very clear, because people are asking questions. So, for example, if I in my clinic offer a non-surgical procedure, I can't have a dichotomy of advertising. I can't have follow the rules with surgery and I can do what I want with non-surgical, because it is now seen as a conduit to surgery.
Ah, right. So it's a
Okay,
feeder system.
feeder
So
system.
they start
Yeah,
with a little bit of tox and a laser treatment, but
yeah,
ultimately you're feeding them through. Yes.
yeah.
So you have to be held to that account.
Yeah, so the standard advertising that I will have to adhere to in my clinic for non-surgical stuff will be the same as a surgical stuff, because it's now seen as a feeder to or a potential feeder to the surgical thing, because that's typically how businesses work. Now, an isolated clinic, which is not surgically related, that will have different rules in terms of advertising. But having said that, my interpretation of the rules are advertising guidelines apply to medical practitioners and all body corporates. If you're a business advertising a regulated health service, you have to follow certain guidelines, because there financial penalties provisions in the national law for breaches of advertising guidelines. So this is what we don't have clarity yet, but it'll be very clear in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Right. And what will you be able to say? So how will you be able to explain and advertise and entice a consumer to have a surgical or a non-surgical procedure?
There's a lot of disclaimers and a lot of obvious what is called as open disclosures about who you are, what you do, what is the registration status, what is your AHPRA registration number has to be disclosed in every post. You have to say that surgery has potential risks. A second opinion with a suitably qualified practitioner is recommended. The results vary from person to person. Your results may not be the same as this, and that kind of stuff. And you also have to have a place on your website where you can access the risk and the benefits of patients before they make a decision to see. You can't just say these are good things that can happen to you, but at the same time, patients should be able to make a decision based on the information given to you to have a balanced view. And you can't say things other than the factual, accurate scientific data. You can't extrapolate saying that if you have if I can use the word tummy tuck because it's a very common thing, you can't say, have this surgical procedure to improve your self-confidence. Those things are gone.
Interesting.
You have to say that, yes, if you have a liposuction, you can expect these 1, 2, and 3. But then sometimes if you look at websites, they'll say reclaim your freedom, regain your freedom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Go for a lifestyle.
They're selling the dream.
Yeah.
You know,
So
in the cosmetic industry, we have hope in a jar. In the surgical and non-surgical, we have a whole lot of other promises.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be that's going to go out of the door. And so as I said, it's to be very factual and accurate and not upsell and oversell stuff. And obviously, you cannot use people who have who are quote unquote influencers, and your relationships with influencers and anything you post on their website or your website, if they post for you, has to be made very explicit and transparent.
Gotcha. So I have been wanting to ask you this question. And in fact, last time I was going to have you on the podcast, we had to wait because this matter was in the courts and very high profile. But there was an enormous amount of damage done from the cowboy surgeons. Let's give them a broad brushstroke. But what it did do after the investigations of, I think it was Sydney Morning Herald and Channel 9, when it brought a lot of this to light, is that the Australian Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons were able to once again have a very clear voice and conversation around the differences between a cosmetic surgeon title and a plastic surgeon title. And I'd like for you to educate us once again, because even now in the consumer's mind, there is difficulty in making that distinction.
Thank you. Look, I think before I start, the current rules that are going to come into force very soon, not the 1st of July, but fairly soon, that's in the pipeline, is you cannot call yourself a surgeon unless you're a registered surgeon, a registered eye specialist who performs surgery, or a registered gynecologist who performs gynecological surgery. So if you use surgeon in any context, you have to fall into these 3 categories. Otherwise, you cannot use the term surgeon. So if you were to use the term cosmetic surgeon after having graduated from medical school and complete your internship and say, well, I can call myself a cosmetic surgeon, there was nothing wrong in the law in the past that prevented you from doing that. But now the new law has been changed so that you cannot do that, and that will be seen as a breach of the national law. So that's the first thing. The second thing is
Can I just stop you there? What is the difference between a surgeon who is a cosmetic surgeon and someone who is a plastic surgeon? What are we talking about?
Okay, so in terms of to call yourself a plastic surgeon, you have to be trained through an accredited surgical pathway. you have to be registered by AHPRA as a specialist in the recognized discipline of plastic surgery, and only then you can call yourself a plastic surgeon. So this involves significant amount of postgraduate training in surgery, in patient management, patient skills, communication, and it includes the entire spectrum of plastic surgery, which aesthetic surgery is essentially a part of. So you do reconstructive facial surgery, you do facial traumatic surgery, breast cancer surgery, breast
So
aesthetic
everyone
surgery.
who has this title has
Yeah.
already been trained in the full gamut of plastic surgery. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. And
So
over
as a
and above
basis,
that,
as a very basic, you have done all the surgeries.
yeah, you've done all the surgeries, you've passed all the exams, you've gone through assessments 4 times a year, and you have a 3-month assessment, then you move on. This is a structured 5-year program, which is hard to get in and harder to get out, as we say. And once you finish that, you are seen as qualified to the highest Australian standard in plastic surgery. And by that, you're eligible to be registered as a specialist plastic surgeon. And along with that comes privileges, such as being appointed to a Department of Health public hospital. You can be given practicing privileges in a private sector hospital. You are recognized by Medicare Australia as a specialist in plastic surgery, which obviously includes, hand surgery and craniofacial and cosmetic surgery and all those disciplines. So that's kind of what the difference is. And cosmetic surgery has always been used by practitioners who have not gone through this entire process. They've gone through different stages of training. Some
So
people
they have been
done.
trained though, right? They're not like pretending to be surgeons.
No. It's back to the definition of what is training, right? So in Australia, all the surgical training that is accredited goes to the College of Surgeons, right? And the College of Surgeons cosmetic surgery training program is done through the plastic surgery training program. So if you look at the plastic surgical training syllabus, cosmetic surgery plays a massive part of that syllabus. So that's kind of what the official training program of cosmetic surgery in Australia is given, administered through the Royal College of Surgeons, Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, which is mandated by the Australian Medical Council, right? So if you go and set up a parallel cosmetic surgery training program, that is seen as a non-accredited training program, which is not the same thing. It's the same thing as tomorrow, if I set up a neurosurgical training program and mint neurosurgeons up to 2 years of training, that will not meet the Australian standards.
But it's been allowed to go on without any regulation until a lone journalist really took up the cause. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying. The video images that we saw of the rogue surgeons performing surgery, making fun of their patients, taking all sorts of health risks that did impact their health and well-being and their safety. And it was going on until a journalist called it.
Absolutely. So I think you're right. It's the evolvement, the evolving of how this whole space kind of quote unquote crept up. It was started by little small things. Then next thing you know, as you scaled up a little bit and you did something else and something else. And you just mentioned in your podcast, in this conversation earlier, that you had a tummy tuck. And we saw a patient who had a tummy tuck.
I didn't. I had abdominoplasty.
Abdominoplasty, sorry. Yeah. And so we saw in the papers that the patient was sent home the same night after having had a abdominoplasty. And you can see where the standards of care were not adhered to, mainly because that particular practitioner did not have admitting rights in a hospital, overnight admitting rights in hospitals. So all of a sudden,
so they shortcut it because they didn't have admitting rights.
And that
goodness. Oh.
And that wouldn't have happened if the practitioner was a qualified surgeon, because when you go to a private hospital and say, I want to operate as a surgeon in surgery, they'll say, but you're not registered. I'm sorry, we can't, your scope of practice cannot include something that you're not registered in, trained in.
And so I know that a lot of treatments became off the menu following the initial changes that were made. So I know that previously cosmetic surgeons were allowed to perform certain procedures, and then they were absolutely not.
There's few things that changed. That the rules and regulations that govern licensed facilities changed, and then there was the insurance premiums that impacted
That's right.
the regulatory risk. So every time there's a new regulatory change introduced, your risk goes up based on how the insurance company sees that. So all of a sudden, if the overall industry is seen as highly risky, then all of our premiums go up as well, because
Yes.
there's now seen that as a impact on how you do business, and your regulatory risk goes up. So naturally the premiums go up. So there's a whole heap of factors that we see well beyond our actual clinical practice that will impact how we do business and practice a business.
Well, this was just the tip of the iceberg conversation. I am so delighted to have hosted you on the show, Dr. Naveen. I
Thank you, Baha.
love speaking to you. I learned so much from you, and I cannot wait to see you speak at the Non Surgical Symposium and to see your advisory panel and to learn from all of you so I can bring it back to my audience. And I'm deeply appreciative of the honor of being invited as the only consumer editor that is attending.
Thank
So
you.
it really is a pleasure and an honor for Ageless to be there in that capacity. I really want to thank you.
Thank you, and likewise, your listeners, if you're consumers, you can be assured that if you have your practitioner attend the non-surgical symposium, you can be assured of a higher standard of care. Just because this year we're going to showcase a couple of systems in place for care of skin, for facial aesthetics, for risk management, for also basically running your business, so that your practitioner can be upskilled to the level that is of a very, very, very high standard. And we are proud to say that this year will not only give the attendee a competitive advantage, but also a very clear roadmap to navigate through the new regulations and make sure that you're comfortable, you're confident, and you can proceed with your things that you love doing and doing best, that is caring for your patients and providing what is nothing short of the best care in the world.
Well, that is good news all around. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being on the show. Loved speaking to you. I'm sure that this is going to be a hugely popular episode. So thank you for being on the
Thank
show.
you. Thank you, Bah. See you soon. Take care.